Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Aaron and I have the pleasure to show you some things about Ionic app deployment and using Trapeze for app configuration. And before we start, I want to introduce myself. I'm Aaron Czichon. I'm software JavaScript developer from Germany. I'm focusing on Angular, Ionic and Node.js. I think it's nearly 8 years now. I'm speaker and author for several conferences, writing articles online and also for a few print magazines in Germany. And I work at PlanB in Germany, which is a consulting company with around 130 people currently working there. All right, let's start. What is Ionic and what is Trapeze? So Ionic is an open source mobile UI toolkit for building modern applications cross-platform, where you can use JavaScript and the web technologies to provide mobile applications with a single code basis and using every framework which you like. For example, Angular, React, Vue, or also using plain.js by web components. Ionic is a web SDK for mobile, which is automatic platform agnostic. So if you're using the Ionic components, then you can create your application using the default UI elements and design guidelines from iOS and also from Material U. So depending on which platform you're currently running your application, it automatically decides using the correct platform UI guidelines. It has fully device support for iOS and Android and also works perfectly on PWAs and desktop applications like, for example, using Electron, or for PWAs using the Chrome browser or Microsoft Edge. And also, as it's just JavaScript and HTML, you can use it in the browser as well. It works with every large currently available framework like Angular, Vue, React, and you can use it also with plain.js, as every Ionic component is just a web component. It has accessibility built in, so for example, if you're using VoiceOver on your iPhone, then it's automatically working with an Ionic application. And we also have right to left support. For example, if you're in an Arabic country, then right to left support may be important for your application. And for deploying the application to a mobile platform, for example, to iOS and Android, Ionic using a native bridge which is called capacitor.js. Capacitor.js is also a project by the Ionic team itself, which is a follow-up solution for the previous available Cordova, and the Apache Cordova was not that great for building modern applications with web technologies, so the Ionic team decided to build their own native runtime, and so they introduced the native runtime called capacitor.js. So you can bundle every application as targeting iOS and Android and also PWA, so you can handle the build process for all the three platforms with one runtime environment. It supports every JS app, not only Ionic, so you can use, for example, your React application with Tailwind, CSS, or your, I don't know, any other UI framework or front-end framework which you want to have run on iOS and Android. You can also use Capacitor for it. It ships with many native plugin integrations. So, for example, you can use Face ID, haptic feedbacks, push notification, network, motion, camera file system APIs directly out of the box. And there are also a really active Ionic capacitor community. So there are many native plugins written by the community. So extending your JavaScript application with native functionalities. And the great benefit about capacitor in comparison to Cordova is that the capacitor JS generates a native project solution. Cordova back in the days were built for configuring Cordova, which is building then later the native bundles like IPAs and Android APKs. And capacitor here is running another approach and generates native project, for example, an Xcode project, an Android Studio project, and then you can use these native project solutions to build your application, for example, extend it with native code, and then ship it through the App Store and Play Store, for example. And this is a far better approach because your users don't have to wait for a capacitor JS update if there is a new Xcode available or a new iOS version available, and because you still have a native project which is generated by the capacitor JS, so you can directly manage the update process here. The problem is now that many Ionic projects are enterprise applications, and which is, it actually is not really a problem, but if you're coming from the enterprise environment, often, for example, in a consulting agency, we are developing applications which are going to be used by many different customers. For example, if you're developing a news application for a newspaper and you want to use the same application for another newspaper with maybe different stylings, and then shipping through another App Store account, then you don't want to manage these projects manually, which you currently have to. And that brings us to the problems of white labeling or configuration apps in general. With capacitor, you have to do the configuration per project. So you need to configure your PWA manifest, you need to configure your Xcode project, your Android Studio project, and you need to handle this in these applications. And if you're developing a white label application, you need to duplicate the projects for each of your target or your customer. And if you then need to ship updates, then you need to update every project manually. Also, the bundle generation, the distribution of your applications is mostly done on your local machine. So if you're submitting your application to the App Store, you may need to install Xcode, Android Studio, and then you need to bundle it there and then upload to the App Store or to the Google Play Store. And this, for example, if you're shipping for iOS, then you need to have a macOS computer, which is sometimes not that easy possible in large enterprise companies, and you manually need to manage the version and build numbers for your applications. And that's where Trapeze is coming in. Trapeze is also another project from the Ionic platform or the Ionic team, as already Capacitor is one of them. And Trapeze has the goal to simplify the deployment and configuration of white labeling apps or of your application during a CI/CD build process. So you can configure your application with YAML, CLI or JavaScript using the Trapeze CLI or configuration module. and it works with nearly every framework. For example, with native applications for iOS and Android, Capacitor, Flutter, React Native, you name it. And it perfectly works on CI and CD pipelines. So if you already have your application running through CI and CD pipelines and deploying there, then you can integrate Trapeze there for example, for the build version number or the version number itself, setting plists. If you like to inject some strings or configuration options during the build process. And it also supports environment variables. So if your build system, your CI/CD system injects environment variables, you can use them inside Trapeze for configuring your application before it's built. And yeah, let's dive into it and take a look at it, how it works. So for our application, we need a small demo application, and I already generated a default Ionic application and changed some variables and color styles for this conference. And as you can see, I've located it in my source code folder, conferences codeweek, and we can just open this application in VS Code. And yeah, I will change the color theme for better visuals. And as you can see here, we have generated a default Ionic application, which is basically based on Angular. We have a TypeScript configuration file, we have our package.json where we have the name of the project, default version number, author, homepage, scripts, and our dependencies where we're using Angular 14, and also the Ionic Angular package here. And if you take a look at the source code, we have the app folder where we have an app component, which is an Ionic application and an Ionic router element. We have a tabs page which contains all our tab configuration. Currently we only have one tab, which is called conference, and this is the tab 1 where we have the title codeweek and an app Explorer container, which is a default component which has a small text in it. And if we now open the terminal and open the application in there, after it boots up, here we can type npm run start, and we then should see in a minute or less our Ionic application. And generated so now it's completely generated. As you can see, compiled successfully. We can open the browser, type in there localhost, and open the mobile view, reloading it for iOS styles. As you can see, I've used the iPhone 11 here as reference, and then we can see our title, our text, and the only one tab we have currently. And I also can switch to another device, for example to Galaxy S20, and after I reload it, we have the styles from Google Material UI. And as an example, we can now cancel the process, and if we now build this application as for an output, I've run here the build command, and it should generate us a web output, which is located in the www folder. And you can see here that we now have here these assets, our JavaScript, and our index is HTML file. So I can now move this folder to a web server, and then it will be running there like just a normal web application. But the main benefit now is that we can, as you may have seen here, we have a capacitor configuration file. So we can now add native platform support, for example, iOS and Android, to our application. And to do so, we first need to install the corresponding packages. We can do this with npm install. It's add capacitor/iOS, for example. We're now installing the iOS package, which will be added to our package.json here, to capacitor iOS, and then we can run npx cap add, which is running the capacitor package, and add for adding a new platform, and then saying iOS, and it will install the corresponding default plugins. For example, you can see here the app plugin, haptics, keyboard, and status bar, and installing the corresponding Cocoa pods, which is required for the native project here. So after that, you will see a message which is saying iOS platform added, and then you can see we've did get a new folder here which is called iOS, and there inside we have our Cordova plugins, which is a backwards compatibility from capacitor, so you can also use old Cordova plugins inside your capacitor application. And then you see an app folder where we have our native application. And I will open this one shortly in my Finder. And then if I'm going to the iOS platform application, and I can open up the application Xcode workspace, and it will open the native application solution. Just in a minute after Xcode is starting up. It will take a few seconds, and here we go. We now here have our application, which is containing some frameworks, which is Pods app, and we have our main storybook, and some configuration and launch screen, and also our Swift base. And if you take a look at our app configuration, then you can see we have a minimum deployment target from iOS 13, have the bundle identifier version 1 and build 1, which is also located here in our capacitor configuration. As you can see, here's the app ID, and the rest is generated by default. So as they copied our web application, which is later launched in the native application, we can now run it, for example, in a simulator. I will just putting it up. This will take a few seconds. It's now building the native application, copy all the assets which are required, and then we're launching soon the simulator for this iOS application. Build succeeded, and now it's launching the simulator here. There we go. Yeah, takes a while booting up iOS. There you go. This is now our web application which we launched and which we developed before in our JavaScript Angular application, which also has a link, for example, to Trapeze website here, and it's working like a normal link in like every other application. So far so good. And before we now continue, we need to add, we need to make this as a comment here. So we call it here, it's feature adding the iOS platform. I will create a new branch for it. Feature and push. Alright, next step will be adding a trapeze configuration for it. To add trapeze to our application, we first need to install the trapeze configuration package. This can also be done using npm, so we also go npm install trapeze dev /configure, and it will install the trapeze configuration package. And afterwards, or in parallel, we already can create our trapeze YAML file, which is later our configuration. And in the first run, we want to configure our iOS application. So for configuring our iOS application, we need to we have the options that we can configure iOS and Android simultaneously with Trapeze. So as we currently only have iOS as a target system, we add platforms and then iOS, and we want to set the version of this application to 1.0.0, and then we can now target the specific project. So for example, if we want to target this project called app here, we can target it in targets, app, and then for example we want to set the build number to second and set the bundle ID to com.Aaron_Czichon.codeweek, as currently this one is, as you have seen here in the configuration file, which is ionic.starter, which is also configured in the capacitor configuration file, but we will override it now with Trapeze for for example during the pipeline process, which if you have a white labeled application, you can inject this one later on with environment variable, but we're coming to this very soon. To test and run this Trapeze configuration, I will just quit the Xcode for now, as we are changing the project file here, and we can now run it also with the npm runner npx trapeze run. Now we need to specify our configuration file, which is called trapeze.yaml, and we say we want iOS project, as we only have iOS currently, and it's located on iOS/app. And if we're now running this command, it should take this configuration here, and it's now also listing all changes which will be applied to the project. So it will, using the build number 2, the bundle ID com.Aaron_Czichon.codeweek, and it will be updating the project file and the info plist file, and we're asking if you want to commit these changes, and we type in yes, and then you will see in our git changes it will be updated, for example here, product bundle identifier and current project version, and also in our plist. Oh no, plist is not updated, it's just formatting things. And if we're now going to our project and reopen it in Xcode, we will see that the application now has the new bundle identifier here, and also the new build number, which is pretty cool actually. For the next step in our application, we also want to add Android as our platform. So same as with iOS, we're going npm install capacitor/Android, which will add also the Android platform. And after installing the package, we can run npx cap add Android, which will generate a new Android Studio project and copy also the assets from our www folder and install the required default plugins as before. And then you can see in our project structure we have a new Android application where all the Cradle and the Cradle setup is configured, and also the application itself with the configuration. So this application now also has the initial default bundle identifier as before on iOS, which was this one. And we now also want to change it with Trapeze. So for this case, we need to add a new target platform to our application. In this case, it's called Android. And we want to change the package name to com.aaronczichon.codeweek, and we also want to change the version name to 1.1.0 and the version code, which is similar to the bundle number on iOS. Also want to use the second one. Okay, so if we're now running our Trapeze configuration with npx Trapeze run, it's Trapeze YAML, we want to use iOS project iOS/app, and we want to use Android project, which is located in the folder Android. It will also ask for changing, and you can see for iOS it will change these two things, and for Android update these, and it will on the Android manifest file will be updated, and also the build Cradle file will be updated. If yes, you can see we now have updated this Cradle file, which now has the version code 2 and the version name 1.0.0, and the Android manifest file is also updated, which has now the correct package configuration name. And we can also now run npx cap open Android. Okay, I don't have Android Studio installed currently, so never mind, but it's the same as with Xcode. If we open the application in Android Studio, we will see that the application here will get updated. So we now have configured our two platform projects using Trapeze configuration here. But as you can see in our Trapeze configuration, now I currently need to specify the bundle identifier or package name twice, one for the one for the iOS platform and one for the Android platform. The better way would be now using an environment variable, and thankfully this is supported by Trapeze. So if we want to use variables, we can define first in the top of our Trapeze configuration which environment variables should be used and should be available in our Trapeze environment. So we want to have, for example, a package name configuration, and if this is not set, we can now leave it blank, and then it will be asking during the process what variable value should be set here, but we can also define a default value. So if we saying default, and then it's com.aaronczichon.codeweek, and now we can use it for the bundle ID. It's going $package name, and the same for package name, which is package name. And if I'm now going to save and rerun the Trapeze configuration, then you will see, okay, it will use the package name com.aaronczichon.codeweek. And this is the same as before, but we only have one environment variable. The best environment for this is now if we're running our Trapeze configuration in a CI/CD pipeline. So for example, I committed this project for everyone public available on GitHub. So we now want to use, for example, GitHub to build our application. And also in a perfect case, we also want to upgrade this version code and the build number automatically based on our GitHub pipeline or workflow in this case. So if we're going to our GitHub project, which we created before, which is this one here, where our application is living, then we want here in the GitHub Actions project, we want to create a workflow which is running our Trapeze configuration. So if we now want to create a GitHub workflow here in our application, we first need to create a .github folder. Oh, not comma, it's .github, and then new folder called workflows, and then we can define a name, for example, bundle apps.yaml. And now we can name the workflow bundle apps. We want to trigger this one on push to specific branches. In this case, it's our current branch feature conference minus process. And now we want to define the jobs for this. And one job is always, jobs on GitHub are always concurring. So we can define one for the iOS and one for the Android runner. And we can now use bundle iOS. This is just an identifier. We can now name it, which is called build and bundle iOS app. It should be run on macOS latest. Yeah, so the steps for this jobs are first is that we need to check out this application, this repository, and then afterwards we want to set up Node because we're running in a Node environment and need to build our application. We can specify the version which should be used. Node minus version, we want to use 16. And then the next step, run npm install. And now we are running Trapeze, so it's npx trapeze run config, it's trapeze.yaml. As we're on the job for iOS, we're running iOS project iOS/app, and as we are in an CI/CD environment, we should add the flag minus y, because this is submitting the yes for these applying changes, so it's not asking during the build on the pipeline. And after that update, we can now run npm run build to build our application, run npx cap sync iOS, which is copying our web output, which is built into the www folder into our native project. And after that, the next step, we need to set up the build for the iOS build action. So I will just going to run this now, to implement this now. There it is. There is an action, it's called iOS build action, which is building a native iOS platform, I need to specify the project branch, all the certification stuff, and workspace path, export method, which exports an app IPA, and then I'm using the action called upload artifacts, which is picking this app IPA file and then adding it to the workflow runner as an artifact output as iOS IPA. So, and the next step would be, not removing the A. We need to specify the Android bundling here. So it's bundle Android app, which has a name build and bundle Android app. This runs on Ubuntu latest because we don't need a macOS runner here. And the steps for this are looking pretty similar. Uses action / checkout / v3 uses action / setup node / add v3 also uses with node version 16 run npm run npm run build, but we need this trapeze step in here, npm npx trapeze run, I think it was. Yeah, then we can copy this from there, replacing it here, trapeze, but it's not iOS, it's Android, and then Android for this. And then we're building it, and then I'm using an available action, uses Spark, Fabric, Android, build, action, add file 3.0, which is configured with project path, actually, which is Android, as we can see here in our folder structure. Build type, which we don't want an APK, we want we want an APK, not the bundle type. The output path, which is app.apk, and as a last step, we also want to use these upload actions, upload artifacts. It's 3. Configuring this action now. Its name app.apk, and we want to publish it as app.apk. Alright, and now the special part will be that we want to use the workflow number as build number. So we define in our trapeze configuration GitHub run number, which has a default of 1. GitHub run number is an environment variable which is automatically available on GitHub. So if I take a look at the GitHub action documentation, you can see it's available there, a unique number for each run, a particular workflow. And this is the correct one we want to use here. And we can now use this one for the version code and the build number. And build Android platform and trapeze configuration. This will now commit it to the repository, and then in the repository we will see there are new actions, if they're going to be uploaded. Oh, I think I need to set it up first. No, it's not main. I think it's conferences, process, GitHub workflows, bundle apps. It should be available. Yeah, there it is. And then you can see we will run both jobs we defined before, which we defined here, not here in our, here it's bundle iOS and bundle Android, and both of them will be now running in parallel on their corresponding platform. And we just need to wait a few minutes until they've run successfully. So our two first build runs failed. iOS was expected to be failing, as I don't have configured the key store and the keys and the secrets. And the Android, I have missed out that I need to, where's my configuration? I need to add also the cap sync command. I've committed it, and then we're now running a second time, and we're waiting for the build on Android to succeed. All right, here we are. Completed Android build was running, and then if you go into summary, then we will see it has missing the things for the build of the iOS application. And if we go into the application, then we can see it's not uploading any file currently, but it exported the output file. So if we want the correct name here now, I've had a misspelling here. It should be output path. But we can run it again in the background for now. Fix name. I think this is not the correct one. Output path. Yeah, that's right. All right. So as it's running again in the background, we can take another look on the Trapeze configuration. So this is just a basic configuration for Trapeze here, and if we like, we can go way more further on configuring it. So for example, if we're on the iOS platform here, there's also the option that we can set different build settings, for example. So if we're in this application here, we can say, okay, I want to change the build settings and for example, then setting enable the bitcode to false and strip Swift symbols false. So then the symbols will be shipped into the native application, and then we can run and debug our application on our app. The same works for frameworks, for example. So if I want to include some frameworks inside my bundle, then I can specify them here. So for example, audio toolbox.framework, or for example, the core services from Apple, and these all will be added to our project here. Or if we want to interact with messages, then messages UI.framework. And we can also update the plist file. So for example, the default one, we don't want to replace it, we just want to update it. And then, for example, we want to add an entries for the usage of Face ID. So ns Face ID usage description, and then we can say used to unlock our application. And we have very, very huge possibilities here to configure our application. This works for iOS and this also works for Android. And if you're not familiar with the YAML configuration, you still have the option to switch to the configuration tool. So you can also always use use the project API and configuring it by using a basic JavaScript script and interact with Trapeze here. You can also find every option which is configurable here in the documentation for Trapeze. And yeah, that's it from my side. So thank you very much for listening. If you want to get in touch with me, here's a QR code link to my website, where is my email handler, Twitter handler, and where I also will add a link for this to GitHub. And then on GitHub you can find a repository with all the documentation, and I also will submit the PowerPoint slides here. Thank you for having me. Bye.